All right, good morning. So in this particular video, I'm going to discuss with you how to evaluate the quality of an academic research article. Now, those of you that are taking my class will see that the first question on every quiz is the same. How good is the journal? How many citations does the article have? Is this a good article or not? And it's important for you to be able to evaluate that. And I'm just going to tell you why. Hopefully this story will resonate. So at my previous employer, I was working at a school in Texas, and the dean and I and a local entrepreneurship organizer were invited to meet a world-renowned entrepreneurship expert. A local church had invited her in. I guess they'd paid pretty high figures for her to come and give a talk. And I said, well, that's interesting. Who is this person? And they gave her name, and she wasn't somebody I had ever heard of. She wasn't somebody I'd heard of because she wasn't a famous entrepreneur, and she wasn't somebody that I had heard of as an entrepreneurship researcher. Now, those of us in the entrepreneurship research community, for the most part, know all of the big names. We either know them because we've written to them and asked them questions, we've read their articles, maybe we met them at a conference, or if we're really lucky, we've even gotten a co-author with some people. But she was not somebody I'd ever heard of. And so I went with my students in class because they were going to come too. And we looked her up on Google Scholar. And she was somebody that had a couple of books printed at a university printing press. And a university press in this particular case was somebody that basically anybody could write a book and then just pay to have that book printed. Didn't mean she really was an expert in anything. She just had the money to pay and have a book made for her. I mean, quite frankly, a homeless person could write some stuff down on a page, and they had the spare change to give this printing press. They could have done that and had some books printed. But it wasn't just that she'd had her book published at a no-name press, because sometimes you do just want to get your ideas out there. I get that. But I think more importantly was the fact that her books had received no citations. They weren't considered seriously by the academic community, and I'm not convinced they were considered by the practice community either. So my students were kind of thinking, well, maybe we're misjudging. Let's do a little bit more looking. So we looked her up on YouTube, and I'll tell you, the lectures she was giving on YouTube are like a train wreck. I mean, it was awful, but you couldn't quite look away. And I felt really, really bad because this church had paid a substantial sum of money for her to come and provide some sort of a educational initiative on entrepreneurship. So the church had asked the three of us, my dean, who was an economist, me, who knows a little bit about entrepreneurship, and then this local entrepreneurship organizer who was also considered somewhat of a religious figure in the community, to come and ask her some questions. I kind of put her on the spot and hopefully get some insight from what she was doing that she could share with the members of this church congregation. And I prepared the normal kinds of questions that you would ask any fellow academic at a conference. I mean, they weren't particularly what I would call hard questions, but just kind of normal ones. And as she was talking, and again, it was also weird that she put herself out as an expert in theology, economics, and entrepreneurship. And this is a very unusual combination. Most people are an expert in one field, even most people don't say they call themselves experts. Most people say they study or they're familiar with a certain field, and then they maybe have a secondary field. So for example, I'm an entrepreneurship researcher. It's my main focus, but I have kind of some side interests in like French literature, philosophy. Certainly not an expert in them. I wouldn't be recognized as an expert by other scholars in philosophy or French literature, but it kind of informs my entrepreneurship research. But again, to say you're an expert in all three, especially those three, it's such an unusual combination of theology, entrepreneurship, and economics. So we're all a little bit skeptical. So she gives her talk. She was mentioning something about this concept of thriving. And it was real weird. Her arguments didn't make sense. And at one point I remember looking over at the dean, the economist, and he just had his hands like this in his face. And she misquoted famous economists. I mean, it was a train wreck. So when it was time to ask questions, I didn't want to ask, a serious academic question. I asked a real softball question. I said, well, this concept of thriving you mentioned, can you give one example from your research of where you've seen this? And that's a real softball question. If you've been researching, you can come up with hundreds of examples, not just one. And she danced around it and couldn't give a single example of anything she had actually researched on this concept and couldn't give a single example. And afterwards, I was chatting with my dean and the local religious leader, and they said, "Well, what'd you think?" I said, "Well, I don't know what that was, but it wasn't entrepreneurship." And I looked at the dean and I said, "What do you think?" He said, "Well, she, had a fundamental misunderstanding of basic economic theory." And I looked at the religious guy and he said, "Don't look at me. She misquoted the Bible." And a lot of people in the room were really liked what she had to say because it sounded good and it was packaged well, right? And she took these people's money, but she was basically a snake oil salesperson. And so I'm going to give you the tools to evaluate people when you actually see them. And I'll give one more story to illustrate this. At my first employer, our dean brought in another entrepreneurship expert for an interview to work in our entrepreneurship center. And the gentleman presented something on the business model canvas. So if you take my course, you're going to see the business model canvas. And he presented it, and they said, "Do you have any questions?" And I said, "Well, that's a really interesting presentation you gave." I said, "But this doesn't look like the business model canvas at all. I don't entirely understand what this is even supposed to be. This doesn't look anything like the canvas or even any of its offshoots." I said, "How did you come up with this?" And he said that unlike me as an academic, he had been a paralegal and he had a real job in his previous life before he ran entrepreneurship centers. And that unlike me, he could judge a book by its cover. So he had seen the business model canvas book, and based on the front and the back, he was able to extrapolate and create this brand new thing, and that he was on the cutting edge. And that's what made him special. And I remember my jaw dropped. And I looked over at a couple of my colleagues in entrepreneurship and their jaws dropped. But of course, again, we were coming in with a degree of skepticism because this was somebody billing themselves as an international expert, but clearly didn't have the experience as a practitioner and didn't have the research background either. So we're going to give you some ways to evaluate that in this particular discussion. So let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing we're going to do is whenever, and these are kind of my tips for how to read an article. So whenever you're given an article, there's going to be an author at the top of the article. And the first thing you want to do is look up who is that person. Just look them up on Google. And the reason you do that is you want to get a little bit of information about their background. So for example, a sociologist approaching entrepreneurship is going to have a very different opinion about entrepreneurship than would someone that's an entrepreneurship researcher, or would an economist, or would a consultant, et cetera. So it's important to know where their biases are coming from. Okay, we all have biases, by the way, but this is important. And the next thing that you're going to do, let's see if we can do a share screen successfully here. Give me 1 second, please. And the next thing you're going to do is, let's see here. I have a little trouble with my computer here. Stand with me. The next thing you're going to do is you're going to look up the journal. Let's see. Whoops, it's not quite what I wanted to do. Gosh, I hate technology. Okay, there we go. So the next thing you're going to want to do is look up the journal. Now, there are a lot of indexes out there that rate journals, and it gives them some sort of an assessment of quality. Now, individuals, scholars are giving these assessments of quality. So they're very, very biased in certain ways, but at least gives you a baseline. So the one that I find is very inclusive is the Australian Business School Dean's List. And I'm going to show you where you find that. So let's do a shared screen again. So here's the actual website. Okay. Now there's a couple ways you can do this. You can actually click this Excel file and just push Control S and look for the journal that you're reading, or you can also come here for an actual citation. So let's say, because if you're taking my class, this will happen. You're looking at the Academy of Management review. And let's say you don't even want to go by Academy of Management Review or Journal. You just want to say Academy of Management. So I'm going to go ahead and push Enter. And look at that. Here's a whole bunch of them. They come right up, and you can click them, and it'll take you to the website of the journal. So if you're looking at, let's see here. In our class, we're going to look at something in the Academy of Management Review, and that is what we consider an A star. That is the absolute best ranking of a journal that you can get in Australian Business School Dean's List. This is a very prestigious journal. you're looking at an acceptance rate of 1 to 2%. So something that's published in here doesn't mean it's necessarily good or great, but it at least means that it was accepted by the academic community. And there was a peer review process that went into it. And you hear peer review process a lot. So let me tell you what that means. You or anybody on the street can submit anything to a journal. Okay. Now, when you submit to a journal, an editor of that journal will look at your article and then make some different decisions. The first thing they can do is decide on a desk reject, which means that I don't think this journal or the article that you submitted is a good fit for the journal, i.e. maybe you submitted something on manufacturing to an entrepreneurship journal, it has nothing to do with the topics of that journal. You could be rejected for that. It could be rejected because the editor doesn't believe it's of sufficient quality to actually get published, and it can be rejected for that reason. So those are two kind of rejection decisions. The next thing they can do is say, okay, I think there might be something here, and the paper could probably, well, I guess the third decision, which never happens, is the editor could decide to accept it outright. That never really happens. The next thing that the editor can do is decide that this paper has a chance of getting published, and this is a different avenue, and they will contact reviewers who are people known to have some degree of expertise in whatever you're writing about. And they'll send that out to the reviewers. The reviewers, other scholars for the most part, will look at your article and give you feedback on it and make a recommendation as to whether it should be published or whether it needs some revisions, some changes, improvements, or it should just be rejected outright. The editor will collect normally the opinions of 1 to 5 reviewers and then give you some sort of an assessment. It'll probably never be accepted the first time, but then normally usually after 2 or 3, if you can manage to convince the editor or the reviewers each time you're improving, you might actually get accepted. And so that's what peer review means. These reviewers, other academicians, are looking at your article and telling you what needs to change about it in order for it to be considered acceptable for publishing. So again, it doesn't mean that it's perfect, but it at least means that you can't just put out just total garbage. Somebody has to at least think it's worth publishing. And so that's what we mean by the best of the peer review. So Academy of Management Review is one of the best peer review journals out there. It is an A-star. Now you see some of these others like Asian Academy of Management Journal, that's given a rating of C. Doesn't mean it's a bad journal. Other kinds of indexes may give it a very high rating. It's hard to say. But this just means that it's probably easier to get in. Maybe things are less theoretically developed. However, I also think it's important to read the C journals because there's some really cool things out there in C-level journals. So, peer review doesn't always mean quality. It just means that it conforms to a certain standard. There's some really cool things in C journals. And as you take my course, you may find some things that are in C journals, in books, in book chapters that maybe don't have the same rigor of peer review, but I certainly think are worth reading. So again, here is how we're gonna look at the journal. So I say, how good is the journal? You say it's an A-star, an A, whatever it is. Okay. Same thing, you can type down field of research if you just want to browse journals, like maybe you can say economics, law, statistics, a whole bunch of different choices here. And you can also browse by journal ratings. So that's how you're going to evaluate the journal. So I'm going to stop the share and we're going to show you the next thing. So the next thing you want to do, so you've evaluated the journal, congratulations. And by the way, if you decided to download it as an Excel spreadsheet, the ABDC journal list, here's how it looks in the Excel spreadsheet. And you can also just do a control find and find your journal. And look, there's Academy Management Review right there, and it still gives you the same A-star rating. So that's how it would look if you did it as downloading the Excel spreadsheet. Okay. So the next thing we're going to do is actually look at a Google Scholar profile. This in. So now we have to evaluate not just the journal, but the article itself. Okay, so one of the articles that you're going to look at, is going to be Career in a Hurry. And here's the article itself. Now, what you can do if you're working on my class, just copy and paste the title from the syllabus into here and it'll come up. I can't always remember this full thing off top, but I can always remember Curry in a Hurry. So here's the article that you're going to read in this course. Don't click here where my mouse is. You always want to click here to the right. Now, in my class, I've also uploaded these articles to Canvas so you can click them. This is if you want to actually download the article independently or you're doing some research. So here is causation and effectuation. There's the article right there. You can read it, you're good to go. But let's say you want to know a little bit more about the article itself. Let's say you want to know about the author. But this is by S.D. Sarasvathy. See, it's here. So you're just going to click the author's name right here, like so. And here she comes. It says Sarah Sarasvathy, tells you her title. She has a homepage that you can click on, tells your interest, entrepreneurship, cognitive science, behavioral economics. In fact, you can click on any one of these and look up similar scholars in the same field. And it shows you all her different articles that she's published, the number of citations, and when it was put out. You can see her total number of citations, 29,000 citations, which is pretty darn impressive. And you can just see what kind of articles she's published if you want to read more of her writing. Let's go back and see what else we can find. You see where it says cite here? You know how you hate, and I'm sure you all have had to do this for another class, like writing a research paper. Don't you hate it when you have to evaluate a bunch of articles and then manually type in the citations one by one? No need to do that anymore. Watch this. Click cite, and here's all the citation formats. So in business, we normally use APA. You click that just like so, you push Control-C to copy it, and then Control-V in the document, and bam, your citation is pasted right there in your references. No need to type these things manually. If you use MLA, Chicago, you have these other ones too. This will actually feed the citation into some reference software. I have to admit, I never really got into using reference software. I know people that do. I never learned how to use them, and I still haven't. So I'm not saying it's bad, it's just I don't do it. Now, let's say you have to write a research paper on this particular article, and you need to find some people who have talked about her article. No problem. Click Cited By. Here is a list of all the articles on Google Scholar that have cited the Curry in a Hurry article. And you can go through and maybe find some articles that cited her article. And then if you read like 5 things that are pretty close to what she's talking about that cite her, you read her article, and then you maybe read some related articles which have similar key terms. If you were to read about 10 articles surrounding this particular article, I would think that you would have a pretty good understanding of effectuation, enough to certainly write any sort of an undergraduate level paper. You would be quite knowledgeable on the subject. Yeah, I don't think there would be any doubt that you would know enough. Maybe not enough to publish an academic article, but certainly enough for an undergraduate level paper. So, about 10, as long as you can understand and soak it up, I think you would get it. Now, for my students who are reading academic articles for the first time, I know this is really hard. The more practice you get with reading articles, the better you get at it. So with effectuation, the first couple articles you read, you're like struggling, what is effectuation? You'll understand it better and better the more articles you read. And then there'll come a point where a lot of the new terms, you pretty much get it. You can go through that pretty quickly, and then you're focusing on what's new in each particular article you get into. So you go from like the first time you read an article, not understanding 100% of what's in there and having to struggle with it. And then you read the second article and you're like 95%. And then by the time you've read the 10th article, you understand all but the last 15% of the article, and that you have to struggle with. So this does get easy. So if you are asked how many citations does the article have, here's the answer right here. And if you're asked, is it a classic, an obscure article, a success? The rubric in business for a successful article is 10 publications. Or excuse me, 10 citations. So if you're getting to more, several hundred citations, John, this is obviously a classical article. If it has less, it doesn't mean it's a bad article. Maybe it's a new article, maybe it's obscure, but there's some really cool things out there in the obscure articles. So it doesn't mean it's not worth reading because it's obscure, but you also know if someone tells you like, this is an amazing classic that everybody's read, you probably know that's not true. So you want to approach that with a bit of skepticism. So I've given you the tools of how to evaluate an article and also a scholar. Now, you can do the same thing, with any particular scholar. Like, I don't know, let's see, who is, let's see if someone's well-known. I'll take somebody who I like, Alfred Whitehead. Okay, he's one of my favorite writers. He actually does not have a Google Scholar profile, probably because he died about 100 years ago. But somebody has made a bunch of Schumpeter profiles. I guess they took that down. Let's see, I don't know who this is. Jay Fagerberg. Okay. Let's see who this person is. Pretend he's your professor. You can actually paste that in there. And look, there he is at the University of Oslo, 28,000 citations. And you can actually click his him right here, and you can see everything that he's doing. And based on the fact he has this many citations, yeah, he's definitely world renowned for this particular topic, innovation, et cetera. So if I mispronounced his name, I apologize. But anyhow, this is how you could look up an individual scholar by name. And any of your professors, you should be able to look up on Google Scholar. They probably have a Google Scholar profile, and you can look them up. And of course, you can read some of the stuff they've written and kind of get an insight into how they think. It would definitely impress them if you threw in some of their concepts, during a class discussion. Be careful doing it on an academic paper. They may try to engage you head on in some sort of a debate. This is how you will evaluate an academic article. As always, hit that thumbs up if you found this useful. Definitely hit the subscribe button. And my students, make sure you put a comment, one thing you learned in this video. All right, thanks for watching. Stop the share.